Hello everyone, welcome back to Umineko part 14. The last time we left off, 2 people died again, and we still have that unopened letter from someone. But without further ado, let's just get right into today's episode.
とにかく、この部屋は警察が来るまでこのままにして施錠します。いいですね。
Natsuhi proclaimed it as though she didn't care whether they agreed or not. If anyone had a right to object, it would be George, but he looked as though he had shed enough tears. Still facing away from them, George nodded slightly and rose to his feet, and everyone else agreed in response. Natsuhi still hadn't opened the hit Western-style envelope she had picked up. But, since they would all be leaving the room now, she decided that she would unseal it in the parlor where everyone could watch. As soon as they walked out into the hallway to head back to the parlor, some of them immediately felt something out of place, or maybe sensed something strange. Oh, Oh, okay, it's just Maria.
答えよ。
Oh no.
マリアもわかるか。こりゃ何の匂いだよ。ひでえ匂いだぜ。
As they all sniffed the air, they did notice a horribly foul, burnt smell, unlike anything any of them had ever smelled before, drifting through the hallway. Oh no.
私、ちょっと厨房を見てきます。火はちゃんと消したはずなんですよ。
After noticing a burnt smell, it was natural that Kumasawa, who had just been cooking in the kitchen, suspected that her own clumsiness had caused it. Kumasawa hastily dashed away. What if it's like a burnt body that's causing the smell?
カノン、熊沢と行きなさい。一人にさせないように。
はい。
After nodding at Genji's order, Kanon went chasing after her. The others, although they did not run, also followed in order to search for the source of the smell.
臭い。
これは確かに鼻が曲がりそうな匂いですね。しかし、換気のために窓を開けてもいいものか。
Natsuhi was reluctant to open the windows in a situation where self-defense was so important.
換気扇を回させましょう。窓を開ける必要はないと思います。
ジョージの兄貴、話しかけても大丈夫かよ。犯人を探す相談なら構わないよ。
It seemed that George had already climbed out of the abyss of his sorrow. All that filled his chest now was a quiet flame of hatred towards the killer who had stolen the lives of his beloved parents.
部屋にはチェーンがかかってた。さっき構造を見たが、とても外から細工できる代物じゃねえ。つまり、完璧な密室だったってことだ。そうなるね。バラ庭園の倉庫の時は、シャッターの鍵を使用人室からこっそりと持ち出したのだろうとか、あるいは、複製の鍵を持っていた可能性とか、いくつか方法が想像できた。でも、チェーンは違う。チェーンは一般に浸透した施錠方法の中で、最もシンプルに密室を構築できる。
チェーンだけは物理的に破壊しない限り、外からはどうにもならないぜ。じゃあ、つまり、犯人は扉からは出入りしなかったってことなのか。
こりゃ面白いや。つい数時間ほど前にも、扉以外でどうやって部屋から出入りしたのかって、みんなで騒いだ気がするぜ。
Back then, everyone had been making a fuss over how grandfather had disappeared from his room. Because of the receipt that Auntie Eva had stuck in the door on a whim, it was revealed that the door had remained sealed. And since Aunt Natsuhi had been the only person to enter or exit during that time, she had come under suspicion. Auntie Eva proposed a theory about how Aunt Natsuhi might have thrown grandfather out of the window and left by the door herself. But this door is much simpler. It was sealed from the inside by the door chain. The window had also been closed from the inside, and the bodies had been in the room. This time, it really was, without exaggeration, a true locked room. That's right. If you include grandfather's disappearance, 3 incidents have occurred, and all 3 times the door had been the point of interest. The first was the shutter. There was a key in the servant room, and if we assume someone knew about that, this can't really be called a locked room. The next was a door sealed by the receipt. However, since Aunt Natsuhi had entered the room, she could have let grandfather out through the window or thrown him out, and she would have been able to lock the window before leaving. Or like my crazy theory, he could have hidden until the receipt was gone and left the room later. Basically, this door can be defeated with a handful of desperate tricks. In that sense, you really can't call this one a locked room either. And now we have the door sealed with the door chain. Finally, we have to give up. The window, the door, everything had been locked from the inside. It was a perfect locked room. The first hadn't been a locked room because everyone could be suspected. The second hadn't been a locked room because Aunt Natsuhi could be suspected. But this time, no one can be suspected. This room was a perfect locked room, sealed by a door chain that denied access equally to everyone.
なら、犯人は室内に入らずに犯行に及んだ。
It's a bit ominous that we pan to the shot of George in front of Beatrice, given what we're talking about.
部屋の外から何らかの方法で。
確かに。チェーンである以上、人が通れるほどは開けなくても、多少の隙間を空けることができる。ノックして、顔を覗かせたところを襲うとか。いや、甘いか。
甘いよな。エヴァおばさんの遺体が扉のすぐそばだったなら、それも考えたぜ。だが、エヴァおばさんは部屋の奥のベッドの上。しかも、秀吉おじさんはバスルームだった。チェーンの隙間からでは、姿を見ることもできねえし、手を伸ばすこともできね
え。Right.
ちくしょう。全然ダメだぜ。さっぱりだ。
Something was tugging softly at my sleeve. It was Maria. No, I'm scared.
満足って。
バトラは親族の誰かを疑うのが嫌だから、犯人はベアトリーチェであってほしいと願ったよ。だからベアトリーチェは叶えた。バトラが言った通り、絶対に人間には無理なことをして、バトラに魔女の存在を信じさせてくれた。なのにわがまま。
What did he do? I tapped Maria, who was laughing unpleasantly, on the head with my fist. Thank you for putting an end to my misery. Or more like my fear.
ああ、叶えてくれてありがとうよ。今のはその礼と、不謹慎な時に笑ったことへの教育的指導だ。それより教えやがれ。エヴァおばさんたちの部屋の扉にも、また怪しげな落書きがされていた。あれもまた魔法陣なのか。
あれは特に覚えやすい特徴的な形なんだから、あのくらい知っててほしいね。
Good going, Battler. Keep doing it.
知らねえから花を持たせてやってんだ。ごちゃごちゃ言わねえで解説しろい。
バトラは暴力的だね。あんまり意地悪すると教えないよ。あ、痛い。言うよ、このげんこつ男。あれは月の1の魔法陣だよ。
So now we're doing the moon. The previous one was the sun, and it was the 7th circle of the sun. And this is the first circle of the moon.
何の意味がある？その魔法陣のご利益は？書かれてるヘブライ語の意味は？
記されているのは旧約聖書詩編第107編の16節。主は聖堂の扉を破り、鉄の栓抜きを打ち破ってくださいました。魔法陣の効用は2つ。1つはいかなる方法によって閉ざされた扉でも開くことができる。
そりゃ便利な魔法だぜ。つまり魔法の力に頼らなきゃ開けぬ密室の扉っていう魔女様のアピールってわけか。もう一つの効用は、
開かぬ扉を八方塞がりの事態に見立て扉を開く。難解な事態の時に用いることで、それまで思いつきもしなかった解決策を与えてくれるんだよ。平たく言うと、観察力や洞察力、ひらめきや直感を授けてくれるんだね。ベアトリーチェはバトラごとき人間風情に、この扉の開き方がわかるものかって挑発してるんだよ。
So Maria is saying that there is a way to open a door. We just don't know it.
あ、痛い。
よーし、もう黙れご苦労。上等だぜ。その魔女の挑戦受けてやら。
マリアちゃん、この世に魔女も悪魔も存在しない。
Oh, he's being mean now.
父さんと母さんは誰かが殺した。それが僕のよく知る人間なのか知らない人間なのかはわからない。でもそのどちらであっても必ず人間なんだ。
しかし、どうやって？せいぜい10センチ程度しか開かない扉の隙間から、どうやったら室内の2人を。
それにしても耐え難い匂いです。一体何事なのですか
Kanon and Kumasawa, who had gone ahead, realized before they even reached the kitchen that the smell wasn't coming from there. That was because on their way to the kitchen, they noticed that an even thicker wave of stench was rising up from the stairs leading to the basement. Oh goodness.
またボイラーの調子が悪いんでしょうか。
Okay, now I know why it says boiler room. Those stairs led to the underground boiler room. The mentioned boiler was old and had been playing up recently. Both of them had witnessed problems with the boiler on several occasions, but he had never smelled it belching out a stench like this before. Oh no. Slam. What's happening? Oh.
今の音は。
I'm scared too! The sound that they had heard from the basement had definitely been the sound of a door closing. Although she did phrase it as a question, Kumasawa too had already realized that the sound couldn't have been anything else. Kumasawa was so surprised at the sound that her knees gave way yet again and she cowered. Because, at that very moment, no one could have been in the boiler room. Just a few seconds ago, everyone had been crowded together in Eva and Hideyoshi's room. So, who caused the sound of a door closing just now?
カノンさん。
Instantly gathering the situation, Kanon ran down towards the basement. Oh, he's not scared? Since they had heard the sound of a door closing just now, and there was no trace of someone climbing the stairs, it meant that the person who had closed the door was now inside the boiler room. If the boiler room had been a dead end, Kanon wouldn't have rushed in so hastily. But Kanon was a servant, so he knew. There were 2 entrances, one that opened to the mansion and one that opened to the courtyard. If he didn't chase them now, they might slip away. Kumasawa reached the same conclusion long after Kanon did. But she couldn't let him go alone. If the thing in the boiler room was the killer, an opponent who had easily killed 6 adults in the first murder, then Kanon would be no match if he simply confronted them alone. Of course, by this argument, Kumasawa joining him alone wouldn't mean anything, but at any rate, after a delay, Kumasawa decided that she mustn't let Kanon go alone, and she dashed down the stairs. At the time, Kanon was already in the boiler room. The boiler room's characteristic damp heat tormented him. It had always been an unpleasantly smelly and hot place. And on top of that, the room was full of that horrible stench, which made Kanon feel like he was going to be sick. There was no doubt that this room was the origin. In that case, Kanon should have been searching for where the smell was coming from. However, Kanon kept gazing straight forward as he grabbed a hatchet from a tool shelf just off to the side of the door. He hadn't stretched out his hand because he wanted a hatchet. He had wanted to grab a weapon. Any weapon. Why? He's scared. Kanon gazed into the darkness where the naked light bulb couldn't pierce. Then he answered. Answered what?
ルーレットは数字と赤黒にかけて配当を競い合う。だが赤か黒かのようなリスクの低い賭けはその程度の配当しか与えられない。
Wait, what's happening? The words coming from Kanon's mouth were swallowed up by the darkness. That darkness suddenly started to swirl, glittering. Oh, Beatrice? Golden butterflies. Ooh. It was a very fantastical scene. Golden sparkling butterflies that hid in the shadows all over the boiler room, flapped their wings, twinkling beautifully, and disappeared into the darkness, gathering together. Kanon continued speaking, directing his words at the darkness as it swallowed the butterflies up. But as the butterflies gathered in the darkness, they they must have laughed. But Kanon continued to speak without faltering in the slightest.
逆により的中率の低いかけ方をすればそのリスクに比例した配当が与えられる。親方様は天文学的なリスクを的中できることを奇跡と呼び、その結果得られる天文学的な配当を魔法と呼んでいた。親方様とお前がどんな魔法を求めてルーレットに挑んでいるのか、そんなことには興味ない。しかしお前は忘れている。ルーレットには赤でも黒でもない目が出うることを忘れている。
Roulette has a special pocket called Zero, which means that the house takes everything in certain variants of the game, meaning that all of the coins bet on the table will be swept up, just as though everyone has forfeit.
僕は一つだけ心に決めていた。もしシャノンが殺されて僕が生き残るようなことがあったなら、この身を投げ出してお前のルーレットを全て台無しにしてやろうと。これは親方様が決めたルールでも、ましてやお前が決めたルールでもない。このルールは僕が作った。僕はもう家具じゃない。
This is a very interesting development.
お前のルーレットのゼロなんだ。
Kanon's face twisted with humiliation. It was clear that he had been dealt ridicule in response to his self-denial. Kanon's brow creased even further, and a fierce expression that he had never shown anyone appeared on his face. The hand grasping the hatchet was shaking. His sweat became drops which slid down. It was clear that the emotion causing Kanon's hand to shake was not anger alone. However, Kanon suppressed that emotion.
僕はもうお前の言葉に惑わされたりはしない。
Again?
悪魔のルーレットはこれでおしまいだ。地獄にてさらに1000年。次の召喚者を待つがいい。ベアドリーチェ！
When Kanon swung the hatchet upwards and tried to dive into the darkness definitely sneered. It sneered at the courage as vulgar, lazy, futile, and meaningless. What about Kumasawa, who's supposed to be here? Oh, what? No! Oh, no, this is scary. Why was that? Oh, no. Okay. Kanon, his hatchet still held aloft, couldn't take another step after that. With a clang, the hatchet that Kanon had been grasping fell and rolled on the floor. Oh. And following that, with a pair of thuds, Kanon's knees hit, left, then right. That hand, which looked like it was trying to catch the sky now that the hatchet had been dropped, gradually lowered and rested on his chest. Then the other hand did the same. Oh, what? Oh my! Right there was a handle with a demon-shaped design engraved upon it. The same type of weapon that had been stabbed into Eva and Hideyoshi's foreheads was in Kanon's chest. Oh my goodness! Fresh blood dribbled from the corner of Kanon's mouth as it twisted in anguish. It was makeup too powerful for Kanon's white skin. Oh, the makeup is blood. Oh no. Around the scene, the glittering gold butterflies danced mesmerizingly through the darkness. It was a beautiful, beautiful dance, a funeral march of tribute, ridicule, and contempt for a single boy's self-sacrifice. Kanon had already been prepared for his own death. But he attempted one last measure of resistance, to reject death in at least the form it had been delivered to him. With both hands, he grasped the handle of the weapon sticking to his chest, and gritting his teeth at the acute, unearthly pain, he pulled it out. Please survive, Kanon. I don't want to see another death. For only a moment, a bright red spray gushed out. It made an unpleasant bloop sound. It probably resembled the sound of Kanon's soul as it was sucked into the swamp of the dead.
Kanon-san?
Oh.
誰か!
Kumasawa screamed at the incomprehensible sight in front of her. Kanon was lying in a pool of blood. Kumasawa's heart was a complete mess. Ah, what a terrible fate. He wouldn't have been killed if I had been with him. Ah, what incredible fortune. If I had been with him, I might have been killed too. As she screamed, her expression was filled with complete confusion, and all of the muscles of her face were pulled up, almost as though she was smiling while crying. No one could have made fun of an expression such as this.
何事ですか、熊沢。返事をしなさい、熊沢。
The first one to dash in was Natsuhi, with rifle at the ready. Battler and Genji dashed in after her. Normally, they probably would have started discussing the origin of that violent stench filling the boiler room. But after they saw Kanon, who was lying on the ground as if he were drowning in an ocean of his own blood, the stench wasn't important anymore.
カノン、返事をしなさい。源氏、南條先生をここに。
Natsuhi realized that even though Kanon was on the verge of death, he was still conscious, so she sent Genji to get the doctor. Natsuhi, holding the rifle aloft, faced the darkness in the center of the boiler room and shouted.
そこに隠れているものは何者です。おとなしく出てきなさい。そちらから出てこないなら容赦なく撃ちます。
ライトだ。おばさん、照らすぜ。
Battler, thinking quickly, took a large flashlight from the tool shelf alongside the door and used its light to cut through the darkness Natsuhi was glaring into. But the light only shone on mechanical-looking piping and a door. The door had been left open a small crack, and it was obvious that someone had left through there in a hurry.
夏日おばさん、あの扉はどこへ？
源氏、あの扉はどこに通じているのですか？
中庭です。
逃がすかよ。くそ、この野郎！
Battler let out a war cry as he slammed into the door. Cool air from outside suddenly rushed in. There were some thin, rough stairs leading up. Battler ran up them, shouting.
待ちなさい、バトラ君。一人では危険です。
Natsuhi also rushed up the stairs, chasing after Battler. At the top was the courtyard. The courtyard of the mansion had been built strictly for lighting purposes, so it wasn't a very elegant place. Because it was surrounded on all sides, the air was calm and completely undisturbed, even though they could hear the sound of strong winds. There was only the gentle, sorrowful rain. Through the cold, scattered raindrops, Battler dashed up the stairs and into the courtyard, where he looked in every direction. Of course, the odds of him finding a suspicious silhouette just standing around nonchalantly were pretty much zero. Battler turned around, looking in all directions. He turned again and again. He kept spinning until he almost lost his sense of direction. He prayed that he would see the culprit somewhere in the scenery. But there was no chance. All he saw as he spun was more and more of the mansion's heartless walls and windows. Furthermore, there were two entrances into the mansion from the courtyard, and neither of them were locked. Because the courtyard couldn't be entered from the outside of the mansion, the doors had been built without locks. He couldn't tell which one they had left through. He had to give up. Battler pounded the wall with his fist, swearing,
バトラ君、一人で先走ってはダメです。バトラ君。
Battler put his head against the wall and scratched at it with his fingernails as he cried.
畜生。畜生、畜生。平和おばさんに、秀吉おじさん。さらにカノン君かよ。6人も殺しやがった。飽き足らずさらに3人も殺しやがった。ふざけるな、ふざけるな。エヴァおばさんも秀吉おじさんも昔からいつも優しくしてくれる愉快なおばさんたちだったじゃねえかよ。カノン君とは昨日会ったばかりだが、きっとこれから仲良くなれたと思うぜ。なんで殺したんだ。どうして人ってのはな、殺しちまったらな、二度と生き返らねえんだぞ。タケノコみてえにひょいひょい生えてきちゃ来ねえんだぞ。どうして殺すんだよ。どうして
Bettler was a boy who could understand the feelings of pain and regret in a person's heart. So, he cried. With all his strength. Natsuhi, who had always thought of Bettler as a strong person, was a little surprised to find that he had this delicate side. And at the same time, understood how easily hurt the heart of a young person could be, so she held him.
大丈夫です。あなたも、ジョージ君も、マリアちゃんも、ジェシカも、私が絶対に守ります。母として、そして、後ろ宮家の代表として。
Bettler, after sobbing into Natsuhi's chest for a while, wiped his tears with a bitter smile and tried to convey that he had cried more than enough already, just as he had done the times before.
とにかく、一度下に戻りましょう。犯人を探すより、自分たちの身を守る方が最優先です。明日になれば船が来る。そうすれば警察がやってきて、全てを白日のもとにさらし出してくれるでしょう。犯人がどうあがこうとも、この島から逃げられるものですか。
そうっすね。警察さえ来れば。
When the seagulls cry, the crime will be solved. But for some reason, Bettler felt a slight sense of uneasiness, as if the seagulls would never cry again. That couldn't be true. When the typhoon passes, the lively seagulls should return to the harbor again. I returned to the boiler room along with Aunt Natsuhi and told the room weakly that we hadn't found anything. They told me that Dr. Nanjo and George Aniki had carried Kanon-kun to the servant room. The servant room had a first aid kit and a sink and could apparently function as a nurse's office. Kumasawa-san and Jessica had accompanied them. Stains from Kanon-kun's blood remained on the floor. Judging by the large amount of blood lost and the ruthless shape of the weapon that had fallen unceremoniously to the ground, I figured that Dr. Nanjo's treatment would probably end in vain. That weapon was doubtlessly the same type that had been stuck in Auntie Eva and Uncle Hideyoshi's forehead. But wait, isn't the demonic design on the handle a little different? There seemed to be some small differences in that part. Still, as far as their overall shape was concerned, the weapons were all of the same type. Though it had seemed brutal, we'd left the weapon stuck into Auntie Eva and Uncle Hideyoshi to preserve the crime scene. So this was the first time I was able to have a perfect view of the entire weapon. Indeed, the weapon was not bladed like a knife, but shaped like an ice pick. Or rather, a thin stick. And also, it had a spiral-shaped design, sort of like a drill. To use a disturbing analogy, it looked like something that might be driven into the hearts of human sacrifices in some demonic ritual. Including the handle, it was about 25 centimeters long. Half of that was the stick-shaped part, which was stained with deep red blood. The length of the blood-stained part made it clear just how deeply it must have penetrated into Kanon-kun's chest. But Aunt Natsuhi and the rest were not even looking at the weapon, instead standing in front of the incinerator where the horrible stench was emanating from. They had probably pulled that out of the furnace where it must have been burning. That? It was still smoldering and kept sending out dense waves of that awfully unpleasant smell. Genji's son and Maria were staring down at it. Aunt Natsuhi, probably couldn't stand to look directly at it. She kept shaking her head, her back to it. It must be human flesh. I thought that after everything that's happened, nothing could surprise me anymore, but this was... I stood there for a while, moaning with a rising urge to vomit. The true nature of the unearthly stench was the charred smell from within the incinerator of a burning corpse. Oh, God. I knew it. The clothes, the surface of the body, and the hair were all hideously burned. The grotesque corpse was in a state where not the face, nor the age, nor even a gender could be guessed at. But when I thought about it calmly, I realized that a corpse appearing at this time could only be one person. Grandfather, who had disappeared that morning, and whose whereabouts had been unknown.
おそらく親方様だと思います。
私も同感です。このようなお姿でお亡くなりになるとは。おいたわしや。
That's the thing, though. I don't know. It feels a bit strange that he would be found unceremoniously in this place. It feels off that he would die in such a way and like not even have his body displayed. I can't help but think it can't be Kinzo. But I also I don't really have any explanation for who else it could be aside from maybe like an animal dressed in human clothes and then burnt, because like they said, they can't make out who that is, and so we're all just guessing that it's Kinzo. Still, it's odd.
でもこの死体本当にじい様だって保証はあるんすか？こうも黒焦げじゃ性別さえも想像つかないってのに。
バトラ君、足をご覧なさい。
Natsuhi, with her handkerchief over her mouth and her eyes averted, pointed and told me to look at the burnt corpse's feet. Hmm? Oh no.
両足の指です。よくご覧になってください。
本当だ。
Just as Genji's son had said, there were 6 toes on each foot. Wait, Kinzo has 6 toes? Each of the toes had been arranged so normally that I hadn't noticed.
親方様はお生まれの時から両足の指に特徴がございました。そして故に親方様は後宮家の再興を託されたのです。
後宮家には昔から生まれつき多子症の方が多かったそうです。多分遺伝的なものでしょう。
What if one of the other family members have 6 toes too? Then they were placed in an incinerator and Kinzo is still alive somewhere. Polydactyly literally means many fingers. Because of a little mistake by God when a person is born, one of the toes or fingers splits into 2, and the total number increases. But a big deal isn't usually made of polydactyly in the world at large. That's because it isn't a disease, but something people are born with. So the hospital is already aware of it when they are still babies, and at about the time they turn 1 year old, they are given surgery to make them normal. So, even if a child has polydactyly, it is treated before they become self-aware, so they might not even remember it themselves. Incidentally, it seems that it can occur with a probability of about 1 in every 2,000 babies. So even though it's not usually seen, it isn't that rare at all. Speaking of which, I think Uncle Hideyoshi mentioned something to me long ago. Something about how even Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the man who unified Japan at the end of the Sengoku period, possessed 6 fingers on one hand. According to Aunt Natsuhi, among the many Ushiromiya family heads, the ones praised most for their wisdom had all possessed polydactyly. Because of that, when grandfather was born, his relatives were all excited at the thought that he might become another wise leader. And when the leading relatives all died in the Great Kanto earthquake, it was apparently argued that if anyone could restore the family from that, it would be grandfather because of the auspicious sign of his birth. If grandfather thought being the hit was not a bad gig, this sixth toe must have been pretty lucky for him. Come to think of it, I think I've heard about some country where it's believed that people with polydactyly should be treated as gods and revered. This is beside the point, but it is fairly common in mystery novels for cops to be burned to hide whose body it is. That's what I'm thinking. But it looks like in grandfather's case, just being toasted wasn't enough to hide the proof of his identity. And grandfather's body was not simply burnt. Just like Auntie Eva and Uncle Hideyoshi, and Kanon-kun too, who had been stabbed in the chest. Oh, he had one of those demon ice picks stuck into his forehead.
指に当主の指輪がありません。
昨夜の手紙の通りということですか。お父様、さぞやご無念でしょう。
Aunt Natsuhi let her head droop and closed her eyes tightly. This room had also become a vital crime scene for us to hand over to the police. It was decided that we would leave grandfather's corpse here and lock the room, sealing it. It wasn't clear when grandfather's corpse started burning in the incinerator, since, according to Genji-san, the flames hadn't been that strong. The body must have started burning a long time ago. And that stench must have slowly crept out of the furnace and filled the room bit by bit, eventually pouring out and climbing up the staircase. Putting aside whether he was rare or well done, grandfather had been brought out, killed, and burned, even though he had started out in a locked room created by his auto-lock. There's probably no doubting this. However, according to Genji-san, the boiler room is usually locked. The probability that someone outside our group was lurking around committing the crimes was now overwhelmingly high. And there was also a good chance that this person was walking around with something like a master key. After all, the doors and windows throughout the mansion had been checked. But despite that, the culprit was freely strutting around the mansion. After this latest crime, can we now be sure that a 19th person exists? They hadn't shown themselves once, and yet they're trying to tout their existence. Along with Kirie-san's chessboard theory, I've been using this contradiction to deny the existence of a 19th person. By flipping over the chessboard once more, the very fact that this crime makes it perfectly obvious that a 19th person exists means that the existence of the 19th person is even less possible. As long as that 19th person doesn't show themselves in front of us, if the culprit could get grandfather out through the door sealed by the receipt, if they could kill Auntie Eva and Uncle Hideyoshi from the other side of a door sealed by a chain, then is it possible for them to even create a fictional 19th person through strange tricks and devices? If we still want to believe that a culprit is among us, then the list of suspects is very short. The four of us kids, Aunt Natsuhi, Genji-san, Kumasawa Ba-chan, and Dr. Nanjo. One of these people has to be the culprit. Wait, we can't be sure of that. Just a second ago, we started doubting whether the body here was actually grandfather's, right? Maybe we should try thinking of the other bodies in the same way. For example, the first 6 all had their faces horribly destroyed. Some of the bodies had kept enough of their faces for us to confirm who they were, but my old bastard, for example, had lost his entire face, as though it had been peeled off. We'd only figured out which body was which by their clothes and surroundings. Had a culprit prepared a fake corpse beforehand and disguised it to make it look like they died, then hide somewhere and continue their killing spree? It sounds ridiculous, but that doesn't mean it's an impossible trick. It's too early to give in to this 19th person, no, this witch.
Maria ちゃん、それ以上しげしげと見てはなりません。さあ、バトラ君も。カノンの容体も気になりますし、いつまでもこのようなところにはいられません。戻りましょう。
Maria hadn't gone out with everyone else, but had remained in the boiler room. The thing she was staring fixedly at was probably not grandfather's body, but the demon's ice pick that was sticking out of his forehead. No doubt an irresistible item for the obsessed. I tapped her on the head.
おい、マリア。ベアトリーチェの目的は何なんだ？俺たち全員の命か？
Oh, please, please, please. Okay. Witching gold.
ベアトリーチェはもうすぐ蘇るんだよ。その時、誰も生き残れはしない。
よくも笑えるもんだぜ。自分だけ蚊帳の外だと思ってるのか？どうして自分の身に危機が迫っていると感じない？どうして怯えない？
ベアトリーチェは約束してくれたもん。私は黄金鏡へ連れて行ってもらえるんだよ。そこはね、しがらみも何もない全ての人たちがずっと一緒にいつまでも優しくし合っていける素敵な場所なんだよ。
Isn't the golden land where they will revive at? Doesn't that mean Maria will die too?
私は楽しみだよ。その時はもうすぐだもん。
No. Just what kind of person is Maria? I only know what Maria was like 6 years ago, when she was 3. She had been pure and obedient, and a good kid. This new Maria 6 years later, and the Maria I knew, didn't seem to fit together. Just who is she, this witch who calls herself Maria? To her, with her obstinate belief in witches, this series of unsolvable crimes is proof that witches actually exist. Every time something occurs that would be difficult for a human, it becomes a little harder for the rest of us to not believe in that witch called Beatrice. It must be an intense pleasure for Maria to see her relatives who once firmly denied the witch's existence start acknowledging her existence one by one. Is that why she's in high spirits?
マリア、もう一遍だけ聞く。どうせ答えは同じだろうが、もう一遍だけ聞く。お前は昨日、バラ庭園で手紙をもらった。そいつは誰なんだ？
だからベアトリーチェ。バトラがまだ信じない。
Maria only repeated what she had already said. Maria had met with the 19th person, the witch. Had that really been a 19th person? Or had that been one of the 18 who told her to say otherwise? All that's certain is that Maria had been with the rest of us constantly, has always had an alibi, and hasn't done anything that would put her under suspicion. She's simply overjoyed at being made Beatrice's messenger, and certainly is not our 19th person. I think. You had to flip over the chessboard, Battler. That's right. I wonder what's written in the letter we picked up in Auntie Eva and Uncle Hideyoshi's room. Aunt Natsuhi should still have it with her. What if she doesn't? Oh, no. Oh, wait, why is the clock so close? Besieged. In the end, Kanon-kun did not regain consciousness. Okay, you know what? I think I'm gonna end here. I really do want to continue, but this entire episode has set me on edge for the entire time. And like at every turn, my heart is beating so hard because I'm so scared that something is gonna come out and possibly stab us. But it's been a very, very eye-opening episode today because, well, another person died, Kanon died, and then Kinzo died. But there's also a lot of suspicious things going on. At least, like, how did Kanon die? That's what I'm still thinking. Because I'm sure he didn't want to kill himself, and he was talking to the golden butterflies, who are like a form of Beatrice, right? But he tried to kill Beatrice and was killed himself. Like a weapon just manifested out of nowhere and he stabbed himself. It felt like this episode or this part was so long yet so short. We have so many things happening, like with Kinzo dying. Kinzo supposedly dying, I should say. He has 6 toes. But this is something I'm still wondering about. But why is he not wearing shoes? If he was walking around, he should be wearing shoes, right? Why are his shoes not there and his feet conveniently displayed for everyone to see and somehow not burnt? We have to flip over the chessboard, as Butler would say. But that's what I'm thinking. Why is he not wearing shoes? If they didn't explicitly call our attention to Eva's shoe state of how do I say this? If they hadn't specifically called attention to how Eva was still wearing shoes on the bed, I probably would have not given this one as much thought. But we established that this is a Western style mansion. They're gonna be walking around with shoes on throughout the house. Then of course Kinzo should be wearing shoes in his own house too, but here he's not, unless the shoes got burnt. Now Kinzo, burned in an incinerator with a weapon resembling an ice pick having been rammed into his forehead. The old mage's wish scattered ungranted. This is but one possible result of the gamble he always knew was not in his favor. I see. And here he is marked as dead. But I guess these two, right? These two people are suspicious now. They're suspicious now because of what Butler said just now. If they did not actually die, then these two could be working together to kill others as we speak, because their faces were not fully visible, right? And then there was Rudolph's suspicious premonition that he was going to get murdered. Where did he get that from? That's still something that I am thinking about constantly. But yeah, like if we looked at everyone else except Kinzo, Rudolph, Kirie, and Rosa. These 4 highly suspicious if they're not actually dead. Possibly still alive. Wait, was Goda's face showed? Or can I assume that everything that says smashed after his death means that their faces are completely unrecognizable? Because I know they could still see Kraus, right? Because only the side of his head was smashed. But for Rosa, it seems like it's their face. Well, no. Many suspicious people possibly did. We don't know. Although I would say it's highly likely that Rudolph might be alive. He might be alive because the last time we saw them, he and Kirie just went off somewhere and then he said that suspicious thing. Well, this one was not a fun one for my heart. Or, well, I guess you could say it was fun if you think about how fast my heart was beating throughout this episode. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I already miss everyone who is not a killer. I miss Kanon. I do. He was a good character. I hope he comes back. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. And bye!